Is there anyone else from the scripture aside from Christ that you find yourself looking to, like in the same way you look at Gandalf?
Oh man, S- I find so many characters interesting. I find some characters that people adore in the church, like David, to be absolute assholes. I don't know why anybody reveres David. Was a
With his
garbage human being.
stupid little rocks.
That was like the one time you saw anything remotely like kind of benign about David. David grew up to be this, horrible human being, and his son
Yeah.
Solomon was even worse. And those
We
are
do love them. I
yeah.
never really thought about it that much recently,
I
but
don't
you're
like
so right.
Solomon instituted a
I
system
think
of
I'm sorry
slavery.
to interrupt.
Oh
I'm
no,
so
no, go
sorry, but
ahead,
I
please.
think sometimes, we like the church found it easy to cling to any character that was a child just to, I mean, it's like, oh, this is a great thing to feed children. He's a
Mhm.
kid. You have bullies, and it's like, this is not actually the story of David, is how to defeat your bullies with a rock.
No,
Like, yeah, he was awful later on.
yeah, yeah, and let's tell this Game of Thrones style, like the Mountain versus oh geez, what was his name with the spear? Ah, gosh, I could have told you any other day. My nerd brain has farted. Uh, but anyway,
I
it's
don't
like
think either of us watches it.
well, there's these two characters that have the showdown, and it's kind of like a David and Goliath moment, but it's brutal and is not a kid's story. I actually don't let my kids read the Bible. It's not for kids at all. Uh,
Do you even have a kid version, like with just the stories? Like,
no, I mean, Songs of Solomon alone is like 50 Shades of Yahweh, is what I tell people. Like, this is one dude's sexual escapades with hundreds of women, and the church talks about it like it's the ideal love story. And I mean, I'm not
for
exaggerating.
Steve, it is.
Yeah, he talks about the Song of Solomon's in his book,
Yeah,
and he does bring it up that that's basically polyamory or it's for sure non-monogamy.
very
Uh,
much so.
but why do you didn't answer this in the book? But why do you think that whoever put together the Bible they added Song of Solomon's in it?
I think people have liked sex for a really long time. Like,
Oh
and
yeah.
I think ancient peoples had a less stigmatized view of sexual activity. I think, they weren't as prudish as we are today. I mean, biblical marriage doesn't occur until after the relationship is consummated. And in, Jewish traditions, people still do this today. They take the huppah, the chuppah, and they take it down and they take it to the bridal suite, and the husband and wife consummate the relationship on that tarp that was over them during their wedding ceremony, and then that's the moment for them that they're considered to be married. So Christians, though, have just totally twisted the value that ancient peoples had on sexuality.
Well, marriage is another thing that just married so perfectly with capitalism too, because it's
Hmm.
really just that you're joining assets. There's nothing Christian or really even romantic about it in many ways.
There's nothing romantic about it, and it's really hard to nail down a biblical definition of marriage, because when the text starts out, there's definitely polygamy going on with Abraham. By the time we get to Songs of Solomon, we have a patriarchal polyamorous system where men are allowed to have as many partners as they want, but women are expected to be virgins. Oh, and they're considered to be property too, which is horrific. And by the time we get to the New Testament, we see marriage become this monogamous system where women are still considered to be property. But most historians have concluded that monogamy was a Roman value, not an ancient Jewish value. So that was probably Rome inserting their values into the text. It did not emerge from the early Christian movement
And
at
this is
all.
also something, of course, that Joseph Smith really, a part of the Bible he really loved.
Oh, yeah.
And that, he basically formed this doctrine around and said, why would God make women so hot if he didn't want me to have as many as I wanted?
I mean, it's been twisted in so many ways to harm so many people. What I tell people is marriage is not consistent throughout the Bible. I hope any form of it that's biblically accurate never reemerges, because it's not wholesome. It's misogynistic. It's a terrible system. And that if sex and relationships, no matter how they present themselves, occur between consenting adults, whether they're poly or monogamous, or whether they're LGBTQ or they're straight, whatever. Just the church needs to shut the bedroom door. It's been long overdue.
So let's make sure we have answered Steve's question of why Song of Solomon was ever included.
Yeah, because the Empire chose to put it in there. So why would they choose to put it in there?
So I, have not found a good answer about that. It's one of the books that I think, just I'm puzzled as to how it got there. And the only conclusion I can come up with is people really like sex. It's funny because so few Christians have actually ever read it. It's a very lewd book. That I used a verse from Songs of Solomon in a collegiate ministry because I was expected to add a Bible verse to it. Otherwise, it wasn't a biblical ministry that the church was doing. And we kind of pushed back against that. We were like, this is stupid. We just get together and play board games. We don't want a Bible verse associated with this gathering. That's dumb. The pastor made us do it. So it's kind of a rebellious act. We chose Songs of Solomon 7:7, which says, your breasts are a tree, your legs are your legs are a tree, your breasts are its fruit. I will climb this tree and take hold of its fruit. And we made a stick figure logo climbing a palm tree, reaching up to grab 2 coconuts. And we didn't actually write the verse out. We just wrote Songs of Solomon 7:7. And our pastor loved it. He's like, that's a great verse for this ministry. I was like, you've never even read this. There's no way.
I do feel like I'm walking around on a couple of tree trunks pretty often. So I love that. That speaks to me.
Like the Ents in Lord of the Rings.
So I mean, you've called yourself in your book that you're a church planter. I think another word that I think they would call that in the Bible, an apostle, right?
Different terms, yes.
Okay, but you're a church.
Sorry, Steve. Do you have beef with the term apostle because of its connotations, or?
Oh yeah, I mean, people that go around saying God told me to tell you this definitely question those people. Like, psychologists have labels for things like that.
I don't know. I'm pretty excited about the from the desk of Donald Trump. Finally, I can hear from him again.
Oh my gosh, it's ridiculous.
Tell us about your current ministry, because I do think that story is pretty interesting.
So what we've decided to do is focus more on an online worship service in our church. So we upload our sermons to our podcast every week. And
you were doing this pre-COVID as well?
Pre-COVID, we were doing it like for the live worship service. But what we found because of COVID, it's one of the few beneficial things I've experienced with the fallout of the pandemic, is that people really want online community because it's flexible with their schedule and they can participate at their leisure. And they also don't want the pressure of coming to church because they're triggered. They're deconstructing their faith. They've got a lot of issues that reemerge every time they walk through a sanctuary door. So we're kind of talking to people like us that are, interested in the faith, but they wouldn't identify as maybe Christian spiritually themselves. And that's what we've done with our church and with our assets that we had. We had a building and we sold it as a church, and our church bought a brewery, and now we brew beer and give 30 to 60% of the profits to local charities for social justice initiatives like the NAACP, like the Homeless Garden Project, like Planned Parenthood, like the LGBT Diversity Center that's local in town, and other environmental organizations that are local as well.
I love that so much, and it's really good beer, and I also love the subversiveness of it because, if you just and we talked about this on the other podcast we did, but how this is a very spiritual act too. Just the process of taking wheat from the earth and turning it into something is very biblical to me. It's something that monks have done for a long time. But also, I just love that you can make a beer good enough and the bottles look cool enough, which they do. The art on them is great.
Oh, the artist would love to hear that. She's
awesome.
She was feeling inadequate artistically recently, and I was like, "No, you're amazing." And she's real young, and so I'm gonna send this clip to her.
I like knowing that at some point, like, Christians might drink this beer and some of their money will go to Planned Parenthood and they won't know it because they'll be happily buzzed on a great beer with beautiful art on the bottle. There's like it's sort of got it all. It's like a connection to the earth, and there's a subversiveness, and it's, there's political action behind it. I mean, it's just such a good idea for a church to do.
Yep. Unknowing evangelicals come and they drink beer that helps Planned Parenthood, and they're too ashamed to tell their pastors that they drink beer in the first place. It works out.
I mean, it's also great because most churches don't use their money to help poor people, or right? Most people use the money to pay rent and to pay the big staffs all their salaries and everything like that.
Mhm.
But I mean, that has to be how you handle your finances. Had to have been a big deal when you establish something like this.
Mhm.
What are your methods, and how did you guys come up with them?
So when we had a building, when we had a sanctuary, and if there is anybody that's still in ministry that's trying to figure out how they can incorporate like-minded, values in their church as far as how they handle their finances, one thing that we did is we rented our space out at a very affordable price. And we're outside the Bay Area. Affordability is difficult, but we would rent out our worship hall and all the buildings that we had attached to it as a community center for nonprofits. So they would use our space. We would give it to them at an affordable price. Our building was paid off, so we didn't need to make, a ton of money, but it was enough to cover our overhead. And then on Sunday mornings, when people came to donate, which is rare in an area like this because so many people don't have excess money, right? But they would give their money to the church, and the church would write a check. 100% of that money went to local organizations like the NAACP and like the Diversity Center and other nonprofit initiatives. And we would have them present for us during our worship service what they were doing locally. And, even that is something I think every church can do. You can get creative on how to meet your overhead, and you don't have to have this, Corvette in your driveway and these Joel Osteen style homes. Like the fact that there was a hurricane in Texas and Joel Osteen's sanctuary was locked during that and was not a shelter was one of the most hypocritical things I've ever seen. But it was just a blatant representation of the horrible values that permeate in the church, right?
It's crazy how often those buildings sit empty and could
Mhm.
be used for other things, and it feels like such a symbol of like a shell corporation, right? Like it
Mhm.
just symbolizes the
Yeah.
financial shadiness of so many churches and the selfishness. I mean, I remember I grew up a block away from my church. That's why I started going there, and it was always empty. And like it was fun for us because we would go play on the playground, and then we have this giant playground that's right by our house and everything. But I even remember feeling as a kid like, why is this empty all the
Yeah.
time, aside from like 2 nights a week for a couple hours and then most of Sunday? Maybe people have the occasional wedding or something, but why not, even rent it out to a whole other congregation? There's always this
Sure.
fear of like, what if someone comes through and steals stuff? I'm like, what are they going to take? Bibles? Don't you want that?
Yeah.
Good. Then more people have Bibles. Like, lock up the fucking projector. Like, we don't have anything expensive in here. It's
Mhm.
just, it's literally just an empty symbol of how selfish you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love that idea of using the space for other things. It
Yeah.
seems so simple and obvious, and
Yep.
so few churches do it.
So far, so few churches do it, and it's because they get a lot of pushback because people are scared the carpet's going to get dirty, and that kind of bullshit just really drives me nuts. We were privileged in that our elder board, our leadership team, never had a high value in the sanctuary. For us, church is a people, it's a movement, it's doing good work in the community. So when the building got really expensive to maintain, it was really easy for us to say, okay, we could take all the money that we're spending on maintaining this giant, structure and invest it in something that's going to generate, far more funding for local nonprofits than we ever could have. And what's great is we've kind of eliminated the decision between charity and leisure for our congregants, because so many would come and they would give $20, and then in a way they were kind of sacrificing their ability to go out and have a beer with their friends, and they're working 2 or 3 jobs. They really need that self-care of just, relaxing. So now they can come and relax and give to charity at the same time, and they don't have to choose between the two.
It's really smart.
Now, if you're not, if your goal isn't to make people accept Jesus Christ into their heart as their Lord and Savior, like
Which is our goal for you today.
I'm like,
Challenge
and your
accepted.
goal is really to help the community and the people
Mhm.
around you. What draws people to that?
So what draws people outside of the Christian faith, I think a lot of people that are outside of Christianity really do see value in not being a dick and being a good human being. And because of that, I would say 70% of our church is atheist or agnostic, and the other, remaining 30%, maybe a small portion, identify as Christian, and the rest have kind of a spiritual but not religious approach. They have identified with multiple faiths.
Do you
But
is it the case that the bulk of your congregation grew up in or used to be more strictly evangelical Christian?
we have a lot of evangelicals in our church. I'm one of them, and we have a lot of people that are deconstructing their faith. And sadly, one thing that happens is that when you preach to people that they don't need church every week, eventually they listen, and then they stop coming to my church every week, which kind of is it's self-limiting. I'm like, no, I meant their church, not ours. But in a way, I kind of feel like they have moved on from feeling guilty about not attending a worship service every week. We've kind of liberated them from religious baggage in a way. So we're kind of like hospice for people that are spiritually dying. We're never going to have a big church, but what I do like is that people that have moved on from attending on a weekly basis because they felt like they needed to, I think from an outside perspective, they're in a better life position now. Like they feel like they don't have the weight of the world on their shoulders. And that's a good thing, I think.
I think the community service portion of it too is, so many of us, in theory, want to help a lot more than we do. And I often do this thing where I like go on volunteermatch.org, and then I feel very overwhelmed about like
Mm-hmm.
where to go and what to do. And even having that structure of like, this is an organization that, has like whispers of a feeling of a church that I might have grown up with. And so it has that nostalgia without necessarily the trauma being triggered, but also that I have these tangible things I can do
Mm-hmm.
in my community and things that I can give to, and that they've been vetted, and we have these charitable partners. Like, I think that piece of it is so smart. It's exactly what every church should be doing, and that's the goal. And it's so crazy how little that happens, because
Mm-hmm.
especially in an evangelical megachurch, the amount of money that's in there, and probably a lot of people that do want to help and don't have the encouragement to, or the structure, and saying,
Mm-hmm.
it's all just give your money to the church. It's never like, we're working with this organization and we want you to support them. And I think people just having those tools to know like how they can help and where in a manageable way is huge.
Mhm. I think so too. I think one of the things that well-meaning churches, because there are good churches out there, it's not like I'm the only one that would be far from true. There are really good progressive churches out there, and that are
Yeah,
doing
and there's
good.
a lot in the Bay
A
Area
lot in the Bay Area.
specifically.
They're doing really good work. The one common thread I see with many of them is that they're recreating the wheel. They see a need in their community and they're like, okay, people are hungry. Let's make a food pantry here, rather than supporting people that honestly do it better than we ever could because they've been doing it for so long and they have a volunteer base that's huge. What a lot of those nonprofits have in common that are already doing the work is they need money. So what we figured out a way is how to get financial support to them so they can do what they already do better.
Right. It's like the difference between, let's take 15 people down to Mexico to build this one house or this one church,
Hmm.
and let's, as a congregation and a community with money, support, the causes that protect immigrants' rights and
Hmm.
lives.
Hmm.
Sometimes, and I think a good mixture of both is sort of my ideal church, where it's like,
Hmm.
I am I mean, did I love it when I was 16 and like hammering these nails and and
Hmm.
building a house in Mexico? Sure, I felt like so noble, but I think a mix of the two, of like specific action,
Hmm.
and it's all, there is still a selfishness to it. It's like, oh, I feel good because I'm helping.
Hmm.
I think it's not a terrible selfishness of all the different
Hmm.
kinds of narcissism we have. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that's, so do you guys also have activities where you sort of go out in a, or pre-COVID, I guess, go out in a community way and really help in a hands-on situation?
Yeah, in the before times, we would go out and volunteer with those organizations that were doing projects. So maybe there was a beach cleanup that we could go do, and we do have a few congregants that did start ministries that weren't really they were needs that weren't being met in the community. So we have a feeding program on Sunday because there wasn't a free meal being done in our county on Sunday. And our church fronts the bill for the food, and we have congregants that go and make the food, and they pass out life-saving medication like Narcan, and for people that are using. And they also, yeah, they connect people to resources locally that are doing good work. So we help finance that, and we also participate in marches like our Martin Luther King Day Parade, Pride events. There's a Majesty LGBT inclusive drag show that happens, and they always, invite our church, and we go and we support that community. We actually have leaders in our church that are part of the burlesque troupe there, and so it's
like my kind of church.
and they're awesome folks. And the one thing that has really emerged from setting up our church this way is our leadership has members that are out in the community that are participating in burlesque for these LGBT inclusive drag shows. They're doing work with local LGBT youth, that are doing environmental work, that are doing work for those that are experiencing homelessness and those that are recovering from addiction or still experiencing addiction. So it's definitely kind of a mix of both. We don't really support mission work globally, other than sending people checks that specifically give the money to locals in other countries. We have participated with those kind of endeavors, but we don't send money like for people to travel to other countries, mainly because what we hear back from missionaries is the locals say just what you were talking about, Amy. They're like, well, yeah, you guys built one house, but we could have built 30 of them, with the same amount of money it took you to come here. So
yeah, and people who know how to hammer and not this weak 16-year-old fat girl. Just get it done a little quicker.
Yeah, they definitely have told us that they appreciate just having the money circulate in their own local economy too. So I guess if you were taking a macro view of how we do mission work, that's how we roll.
And when you're out in the community, or when you do like your, weekly day of feeding the community, is there any ministry piece to that? Like at any point, are you like trying to recruit people or save them in any way?
No, we're trying to serve people. And I think that's ultimately the teachings that I see that are consistent throughout the Gospels too. There's verses that talk about not praying in public and not doing these religious acts in public, but just go out and do good. Like there's a quote, it's one of my favorite quotes in church history, and it says, "Preach the gospel when necessary, use words." Live it out. That's the best thing you can do for people.